Okay. What's up, psychedelic gypsies? It's Emily Abbott, and I'm here with your Psychedelic Sunday yet again. And this month, we're all talking about how to be a pussy powerhouse. And our muse is Betty Davis, because I was listening to her one night and she didn't give a shit. She just went out and did what she had to do, even though lots of people resisted such antics of hers. But that's what we need, right, to get to this next wave of, integral humanity. And, it starts with ourselves. And so I hope you had a really great week, kind of cultivating your own inner radiance and following what feels good to you. And also starting to pay attention to where you find resistance in your body. And I find that a lot when I start going out and doing exactly what it is that I want to do. So this week I ran into my friend Vinciane de Pape, and she is amazing. And we met at the CrossFit gym. And V has an amazing story. And she kind of came back into my life at a really key point where I got back from travels and thought that I needed to start macro counting, and I was getting kind of all obsessive again. And V and I had this amazing conversation, and now fast forward a few months later, and I wanted her to share her story with all of you because I think it's super powerful and life affirming. And yeah, so without further ado, this is V. Thanks so much for being on here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. When you invited me to do this, I was like stoked right away. I'm pretty much, I used to be a little afraid of the vulnerability of kind of sharing my story, but I realized the more people I open up to, the more I realize that it's an important conversation to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a really big part of, all of our journeys is letting go of restriction and shame and self-criticism. And that's really hard to do. So one of the biggest ways I think that we continue that shame, criticism, and restriction is through body control and body image. And I feel like we were discussing before we started the little show is that's kind of at the base level of where we need to go in terms of like our soul's evolution. Is letting go of body restriction and food control. So I just wanted to ask you, how did you what was your first encounter with dieting or the dieting mentality?
I think that, like most women, I always kind of struggled with my body image. Especially, I was a really competitive athlete in my teens, and I'm tall and I'm not small. And even though I've always been a very powerful athlete, I didn't look like everyone else. And I think I found myself comparing how I looked to other female athletes and not how I performed. So I found even as early as probably 16, I saw my body and my weight as something to try to control. So I think I played around with every kind of fad diet that came around. And I think at a certain point, my mentality, when I stopped being a really competitive athlete, I started looking at exercise a lot differently too. I started looking at that as a means to change and control my body instead of expressing myself through sport and through movement in a way that felt really good. So I think I did, there have been periods up and down where I've liked the way that I looked and ate an intuitive way that, just nourished my body and moved my body in a way that felt good. And then periods where, I thought that I didn't live up to whatever society's idea is of, what a female athlete should look like or what a woman should look like in general. And so I would try to restrict that, and to try to fit into that mold.
And where do you think the messaging first started coming from? Was it like coaches making comments, parents making comments, other
Oh yeah,
friends?
100% my coach. I can follow that thread all the way back to the last coach that I had when I was 16. He was my coach until I was 17. But I was again on a really competitive team, and now in retrospect, when I look at it, I see how insane it is and how incredibly damaging it is. But my coach um, put a spreadsheet together with all of the girls on the team, and then performance metrics like 40-meter sprint, high jump, broad jump, basically just like metrics of fitness performance. And then there was also height and weight. And so it was a spreadsheet, all the girls on the team and how much they weighed. And when I looked at that, it didn't matter that I was one of the fastest sprinters. It didn't matter that, I had an insane broad jump because I'm tall. It didn't matter that I even looked at that and I saw that I'm tall. What I saw was my weight, and I saw that it was the highest on the team. And so I looked at that as, this is something I need to correct, and this is something I need to change. And when I look back on that, I think how insane and how irresponsible it is for a coach of 16 and 17-year-old girls, to set them up for a comparison like that without the context of, that weight is more or less meaningless as an athlete when you're looking at the rest of those performance metrics. So that's really where it started for me.
Yeah. And what's scary to me is that, like, when I remember I was talking to a nutrition guy in the CrossFit world, and he was running a nutrition company, and, he's like, oh yeah, like I run nutrition for the teen girls. And I was like, oh, so what do you do? Like, and he's like, oh, well, it's all about macro counting. And, and I'm just like, okay, but 15, 16, 17-year-olds should not be weighing and measuring their food. Even in like this crusade for like performance, that to me is super terrifying. But I may be jumping ahead of myself. But I was going to ask you, so how did, like, when you got into the CrossFit world after your kind of competitive athletics, did you internalize like, hey, CrossFit like is going to make me look a certain way, or that I need to look like a CrossFit chick?
I think when I first started, I think I went from one extreme to the other in my CrossFit journey. So I started in 2014, and when I started, I felt like I finally found another sport since I had quit soccer, where, it didn't matter how I looked, it just mattered how I performed. And I loved that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, how much weight can you put on the bar? How fast can you move? And I loved that. And it didn't matter what I looked. No one was asking what I weighed or comparing any of that. But then there's always, at the time, paleo was the big thing that went hand in hand with CrossFit. And so that messaging was just so pervasive that I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try paleo because, under the guise of performance, but really it's a diet.
Yeah.
So, I tried paleo and realized that high fat diet, low carb diet is just like not good for my body. It's great for some people, but for me, it just like really makes my body feel like shit. So realized that wasn't for me. And then I feel like, I don't know if it was just that I tuned into it more or it became a bigger part of CrossFit, and maybe you can tell me about how you feel about that. But I feel like there was a certain point, and maybe not like a sudden switch, but maybe a gradual shift in that it did start to matter what people looked like.
Yeah.
I would see, girls at the gym working out in their tiny CrossFit short shorts and sports bras, and then start to wonder like, well, is that what a CrossFit athlete looks like? Is that what I should look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's what when I first started CrossFit, it was the same path. Like started CrossFit, got into paleo, and actually I felt really great. And then, and it was like, yeah, this is so cool because it's just about like if a chick can do a pull up, not like if her aesthetic is perfect. And it wasn't until about and I never wanted to do macro counting or whatever because I was just like, no, like I love CrossFit because I just can eat whatever I want and throw around weights. But really it was a lot more kind of insidious than that. Like really I was working out so hard so I could eat, I think, as much as I wanted to, really, you know? And then it did shift. All of a sudden it was like, well, if you're not macro counting, and I was around all these people who were macro counting, and talking about macros all the fucking time. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. Like I should probably like get my diet in check or whatever, my nutrition. And it started me on this whole journey. And because I felt that all of a sudden there's this huge shift away from being able to be super strong, like powerhouse, to endurance athlete. And the sport did shift, and so too did my body had to shift. And that's when shit kind of started to get really uncomfortable and serious, and it wasn't just a thing that I did for fun, you know, like competing in front of people and like tossing weights around. But now it was very much more about my body and how it looked, and abs, right? So yeah, I totally felt that shift within the CrossFit world. And macro dieting became this huge thing. Hi, Danny.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. How are y'all?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Awesome. So feel free, Danny, to like jump in on the conversation because I know you had lots of experience with macro dieting and kind of pendulum swinging and releasing yourself from that. And V has a very, very interesting story as well. So, awesome. V, like what was the height of your macro counting? And then when did you realize like, hey, I have a fucking problem with this?
It was probably a solid year and a bit, almost a year and a half of very restrictive macro counting. And I mean, one thing you may know about me is I'm pretty A-type. So when I do something, I do it perfectly. And I give 110% in everything that I do. So, you know, when my macros were 155 grams of protein or whatever that was a day, I would make sure that I got it 155 bang on. I would Tetris the shit out of my macros to make sure that they were perfect every day. So I found, you know, I guess in terms of a diet success very quickly because I was so bang on with my numbers. And I think the really damaging part about any kind of dieting is the positive reinforcement that people give one another. And that, you know, when I did start to look a lot leaner, I got so much attention at my gym. The coaches kept asking me, you know, what are you doing? You look great. Not you're performing better, you're lifting more. It was all about how I looked. And other people at the gym were asking me what I was doing and asking for, you know, which nutritionist I was working with and what I was eating and what my macros were and whatever. And it was just like, I think at the start it became so validating that it just further reinforced that like, yes, I need to continue doing this and more restrictive is better. And that, you know, if what I'm doing right now is working well, then even more restrictive and even more working out is going to be better. So I'm not I never was a competitive CrossFit athlete, like not even regionals level. But here I was working out 3 hours a day, before work, after work, and then being super strict with my macros, and then because I'm such a perfectionist, having complete meltdowns and anxiety when I couldn't hit my macros perfectly. And when I was faced with situations where I couldn't control the food, that would give me a lot of anxiety, because then if I didn't know what the food was, or if I wasn't cooking it myself, or if we were going to a restaurant that didn't have their nutritional information posted, like, how was I going to track it? And then it got to the point where I was avoiding social situations because, I didn't want to go to someone's birthday and go out for dinner, because then I wouldn't be able to hit my macros for the day. Or if I did do that, I would go work out for an extra 2 hours, because I knew that it would be a really high carb, high fat meal, and I would have to make up for it in a certain way. So it got to a certain point where I ended up hitting a wall, and I, felt so good about being able to control my body and control my weight and to look a certain way, until my body basically said no more. I was so exhausted and so overtrained, and my body hurt, and mentally I was completely consumed with 3 things, essentially. What am I going to eat? How much do I weigh? When am I going to work out next? And these 3 thoughts consumed my life to the point that I felt like I wasn't present in my relationships. I wasn't present at work. I wasn't present with my friends. I felt like I was really so focused on these 3 things that I wasn't living my whole life. And it got to the point where I stopped losing weight, and probably just because I had put my body through so much, and I still, after all of that, still didn't have a 6-pack, which was like the most infuriating thing to me. That was like, I'm doing all of this, I'm doing everything perfectly, and I still don't look like, a games athlete, which is so insane, because right. I never was. Right. That was like the expectation that I had in my mind. And, I didn't really think that I had a problem until I had like an actual like emotional meltdown about it, to the point where I couldn't go to work one morning because I was so ashamed of how I looked, which, in saying it now in retrospect, is so insane and so crazy that I was in such a distorted state of mind. But I had such insane body dysmorphia that when I looked at myself in the mirror, I couldn't recognize that person. I was like, I don't know who this is. I don't know, like, that body is like disgusting to me, and I'm ashamed to be out in the world with this body. And that was kind of like the breaking point. That was like, this isn't okay. Like, I'm like the leanest I've ever been in my life, and I've been so restrictive and working so hard, and I still find myself like repulsed with how I look. And I was like, you need to give your head a shake. So I ended up going to my doctors, and we talked about it, and she referred me to an eating disorder program, and I was in complete denial that I had an eating disorder. I was like, no, I'm really particular about what I eat, and I work out a lot. And then once I did the intake at the program, I was like, oh shit, okay. So, boxes. Oh yeah. I was like, okay, yeah, I have a problem. Mm-hmm. And I've been in that program for just over a year now. So I'm kind of on the tail end of that, and kind of in like maintenance of recovery mode. But it was really eye-opening. And I think what's so insidious about, the way we talk about diet and nutrition and macros in particular is that, for me, it turned into an eating disorder, but for a lot of people and a lot of women, what folks don't realize is that you can have very disordered eating without having an eating disorder. And even if you don't meet the like clinical diagnosis for it, you can still have incredibly disordered eating that is so damaging and just like robs you of so much in your life. And having gone through that, I just like, I don't want any woman to ever go through that again. It's not worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask, and you kind of already touched on it, like, it's so funny because, like, let's say you did reach like your goal weight or whatever.
Yeah.
And you looked
Then
in the,
what?
yeah, and then what, right? There,
Yeah.
we build up these structures. We think that's what's going to make us happy.
Yep.
But then you get there and then you're just like, okay,
Yeah.
now what? What's the next thing? And and I find that even with myself, like with anything I undertake, I put this huge expectation, and it's like I don't even say it out loud. It's just kind of always at the back of my head. And it's like, well, if you don't do this, and if you don't do it well, if you aren't a huge success, then that means that you're a failure.
Yes.
And because you're not really, what I've like kind of distilled it down to is that because I don't feel enough just as I am. And I think that's this huge collective consciousness that women, we internalize immediately, because just being us is like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
100%. And I think one of the things that I've learned along the way about myself is that rejecting diet culture and embracing myself just as I am is one of the most powerful acts of rebellion that I can engage in. That it's a huge fuck you to everyone by just being me.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it requires the daily work, right? It is so not easy because we're up against a wave of, social media messaging, like just being within a city. It's really hard to even just like love yourself. And so I was going to ask you next, like, how do you handle social media now, and how do you handle that messaging, and what goes through your mind when you are in front of an entire pizza and have this
So I'll answer the first part of that first about social media. I, like everyone else, had Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I used them all for kind of different things, but Instagram was the big one. And when I first got into the program and started treatment for an eating disorder, one of the first kind of conversations I had with my case manager was the impact that social media was having on me. And she was like, what are your thoughts on, getting rid of it? Because you talk about how much time you spend on it and how much time you spend comparing yourself to other people, and all the like fitness accounts and athlete accounts that you follow. What do you think about stepping away from that? And I was like, there's no way I can delete Instagram. Like, that's my lifeline. You can't take that away from me. Mm-hmm. So we started kind of like baby steps. The first thing that I was like challenged to do was to go through all of the people that I follow. And if the account made me feel shitty about myself, or I found myself comparing, how I looked to how they looked, then I had to unfollow them. And so that's kind of how it started. And then once I kind of got rid of that, I was like, all right, well, it's just my friends. Because I got rid of all the macro counting accounts, the dieting accounts, the Fitspo accounts, a lot of, pretty much every CrossFit athlete except you, I got rid of everyone. So I was like, I've looked at like 20 abs today. I've seen enough. And then so when I stepped away from that, I started thinking about like, okay, so these are the posts and these are the people I'm comparing myself to. But then when I look at the photos and the experiences and the moments that I post on Instagram, what am I looking to get out of that? And so when I started thinking, like, one of the last photos I posted on Instagram was a selfie from my 30th birthday. And I posted it because I felt like I looked good. I still was kind of like in my eating disorder. And I like was wearing a cute outfit and wanted the validation. That's like 100% what it was. And not to say that you shouldn't feel good about how you look, but it's seeking validation from other people that I was like, the kind of light bulb went off and I was like, why am I posting this? It was like, do I really need the likes? Like, do I need people to send me heart eyes emojis? Like, is that really what is giving me kind of like, is that what's filling my spirit? Like, that's really sad. So when I started thinking a little bit more about like what the content I was posting, I was like, this is stupid. If I really want to like engage in conversations and have meaningful moments with my friends, which is really who's all left on my Instagram after I deleted everyone who made me feel shitty about myself, I can just do that in real life. And so I like cold turkey cut out Facebook and Instagram. I keep Twitter for work because I need it for work, but I don't really post a lot of personal stuff there anyways. And it was so liberating. It was like the best thing I did for my mental health last year. It was so powerful, and I had no idea how much time I spent poring over other people's photos, or like micro-analyzing my photos, or taking a bajillion selfies to get the right angle where I looked the slimmest. And it's so insane. I like hardly take selfies anymore because I don't have Instagram. So why would I take pictures of myself? I don't have anywhere to post them. But just that shift was like, wow, I spent a lot of time. That was a lot of time and energy. Like, what could I be doing with that time and energy? And that was a huge eye opener for sure.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I've been having a really hard time with just Instagram in general and lately, because it's funny, it kind of sucks you in, and then like you do get all these like cool perks from it. Like I have had like a lot of amazing experiences because of this weird like thing on the screen. But at the same time, like when I stepped away from it when I was traveling, like in India, I shut it down, and I actually found like my creativity coming back, and like my expansiveness coming back. And it was just, it's not, I just really don't think it's that super healthy. And people are always like, oh yeah, well, it's a tool to do A, B, C, and D. But they also said that to me about macro counting, right? So it's like, well, actually, I think it's kind of this like covert addiction and undercover addiction. And it's great to promote a positive message for sure. Yeah. And I'm not judging anyone who like puts up whatever, but yeah, for lack of a better term, it's fucked. It's fucked. And it's like, why are we doing that? And why are we wasting time when we can be reading something or meditating or actually connecting with friends? And I mean, I know that's kind of like the broken record that everyone's talking about, but when you do actually step away from it, it is incredibly
huge.
Liberating.
I started as, because I felt just like the kind of like motor memory of picking up my phone to scroll. Like I would do it when I was like in line for coffee, in line at the grocery store, like walking to work. Like I was like in the elevator, just like scrolling through my phone on Instagram all of the time. Mm-hmm. And so I would still find myself when I deleted it, like having the urge to pick up my phone, and then finding myself being like, well, I don't know what to do with myself now. Mm-hmm. So either I need to learn to sit and be with myself, which at the time was too difficult. So my replacement was actually ebooks. I got the Kindle app on my phone, and I was like, okay, every time I feel the urge to flip through Instagram, I'm going to pull up Kindle and I'm going to read like a page or however long until my coffee's ready. And in 2018, I read 34 books or something, which like for me, like, I'd never read that many books in 1 year. Like that's insane. Wow. And that was starting in April of last year. So yeah, basically like a book a week, because that's literally how much time I was spending on Instagram, and I replaced it with reading books. And I like feel so much more fulfilled with everything that I've learned and everything that I've read than the garbage that's on Instagram. So I feel like my like very extreme, like cutting myself off from social media is not accessible to everyone. But I do think that there are things that people can do to help minimize the damage of a lot of that really harmful messaging on social media. And I think that especially anyone struggling with body image and diet culture in general is just to, again, try to filter out some of the stuff that makes you feel shitty about yourself, and then replace it with content that you might learn something from. And even if it makes you a little uncomfortable, I feel like that's even like a bonus challenge. So start following like body positivity activists, start following fat activists, start following athletes who don't have conventional bodies. There are a bunch of fat yogis who are like incredible. Like there's no way, like my body just doesn't, I can't fold myself into shapes like that, but here they are doing it. And it's like, it's so rad. It's so inspiring. And I love seeing that. I love seeing, like big, strong powerlifting athletes, who don't have a six pack, and really just filling your feed with as much diversity as possible, because that is an actual real reflection of the world. And I think when you start having such a narrow view of like, well, everyone is white for one, everyone is able-bodied, everyone is probably straight, and everyone is really thin and they've all got 19 abs. That's just like really not realistic. That's not what the world looks like. But when that's all that's in your social media, you start to think that that's what the world looks like. So I think like trying to incorporate as much diversity into your feed really starts, peppering in a more accurate representation of the world that's actually out there and where you fit in with that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I agree, the things that make you uncomfortable, well, that's where you need to go. And that's kind of that's what we were talking about last week. It's like, I find like, because actually Danny Rain and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, like we've shifted from just like, and this is what I'm going to get into next, but what I want to talk to you about is we shifted from this like, okay, what will this food, like this food is going to give me cellulite or like a fat ass, to okay, what actually nourishes me, what makes me feel fucking phenomenal. And I can even see with that, sometimes like that can get a little bit like heavy for me. I can hear like the food police in the background being like, like, I don't know if that's going to be good for you, Em. So I can ask you, like, how do you approach health and wellness right now, and what does that term even mean to you?
It's been such a long journey for me, and to be like very honest and very vulnerable, I still struggle with it. I still there are moments where I'm really hard on myself. There are moments where the food police and the shoulds get the better of me. I should do this, or I shouldn't do this, or I should eat this. I think attributing value to food in that, this is good and this is bad, I think I'm still guilty of that, but it's a work in progress. And I think that really my mindset has shifted from, especially like how rigid and structured macro counting was for me in particular, because I was really obsessive about it, to completely loosening that up has been a really long journey. And now I think the way that I try to approach food, and I don't get it right all the time, is to really look at what nourishes my body, essentially, like you said. And same with fitness. How do I move my body in a way that feels good, not in a way that is going to burn the most calories or whatever. I think kind of like one constant reminder that I keep asking myself to kind of like make sure that I'm approaching food and exercise or fitness, or I like the broader term movement, is if this had no impact on my body, would I still eat it? So, if why am I eating this? Am I eating a salad because I think it's like low calorie and it's healthier? Or am I eating it because that's what my body's craving and I want something fresh and I want something, maybe kind of crunchy and something refreshing, and I just really want those micronutrients and it's going to make my body feel good. Or am I eating it because I want to shrink myself? And alternatively, I think if I'm looking at, a pizza, or for me, like I have a sweet tooth, so it's like ice cream or chocolate. Am I only having like just a little tiny bit because I think that's all I'm allowed? Or, am I having an amount that actually is like satisfying and that feels really good to me? So it's been a lot of like relearning how to eat like kind of like a normal person all over again, because I've found myself having to ask like get to the bottom of why am I eating this and how do I feel? And because I ignored my hunger and fullness cues for so long in tracking macros, either by, restricting my macros so much that I was like starving by 7 p.m. but didn't have any macros left, so I would just go to bed hungry. Or I'd have, a bunch of carbs left and be like shoving oatmeal down my throat because I had to like meet my macros. So completely ignoring my body's actual signals telling me that I'm either hungry or full. So having to relearn that was like a whole weird thing. Like actually like, oh, I'm hungry, I should eat. That's the concept.
Yeah.
Or I'm full, I don't have to eat the rest of this. Like I can just push my plate away and be like, no, I'm good. And same with like, I found that my taste buds really changed when I started to allow myself to eat what I wanted. Things that I thought were really good because I was so restricted. Like anyone who's like tracked macros really hard is probably familiar with like Walden Farms, like 0 calorie syrup. I see a head nodding yet. So I would have like my dessert was like one little like Kodiak pancake with like a little bit of fat-free Cool Whip and then Walden Farms 0 calorie syrup. And that was like heaven to me. It tasted so good because I had so little pleasure in the rest of my life that I was like, this is what I look forward to at the end of every day. That was my dessert and it was so good. And now you can pay me to eat it because it's actually disgusting. It's just like chemical garbage and doesn't taste good. And what I actually want is like real like dark chocolate or like actual ice cream or an actual like a really good cookie, like homemade or something. So yeah, it's interesting when you think like when you've restricted yourself so much that things that you thought were good are actually like, it's not good.
Yes.
It's like just the semblance of something sweet that your body's like, oh my God, thank you.
Yes. And I found like when I talked to you and then I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop eating this way, like macro counting. I was terrified because I was like, I didn't even know what to eat anymore. I was like, I don't even know what's true. And it was so scary because I was just like it was terrible. And now like fast forward a couple months, I feel like I've come home to myself and it's like, and my body is totally changing. I don't have the 6-pack abs anymore. And and like, so that is where now the self-love practice comes in and the self-compassion, right? Because everything, we are this changing, beautiful walking art form, art installation, right? And it's going to be a constant process of coming together and then falling apart. But I do remember drinking like full fat cream, like heavy cream. And I was like, oh, like I felt like I was coming home to myself. My body was like, thank you. Like, what were you doing, And then this kind of like led me on my path of knowing what I need to eat and what, and not being so hungry all the time. Probably a testament to not beating my brains out in the gym for 4 days. So
and that's another thing, listening to your body too in terms of movement. Like I was not a competitive athlete. Why was I working out twice a day? Like that's insane. My body, like everything hurt. I was constantly injured all the time.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Didn't make me feel good.
And so I was going to ask you, how do you now drop into because again, a lot of intuitive eating is about feeling, right? So
Yeah.
how do you drop into your body and like check in with yourself, and what movements do you do to feel more?
I think, again, I ask myself a lot, like, if this had zero capacity of changing my body, would I still do it? So when I think, like, I don't know, even this morning, I was like, I went out for a big dinner last night and I was like, ugh, I should go for a run this morning. And like, do I want to go for a run? Or am I just trying to like burn off calories from last night? I was like, you know what? I don't want to go for a run. I'm really tired from my workout yesterday and I don't need to go for a run today. It's fine. So here I am literally lying in bed on Sunday, and that's what my body wanted. So I think it's constantly checking in with that. And I think my fitness, exercise, movement journey has definitely changed from when I first started CrossFit. And I think especially when I stopped, I was doing insanely high volume programming. My body was so burnt out, and I needed a break from that. So I started doing like a lot of really different stuff. I started doing like group classes at a bunch of different studios. I went to like a boxing gym. I did Pilates a few times. I started doing dance. I just, I don't know, I wanted to try to see like what actually felt good for my body. And I realized that as much as I do like that variety, I really feel at home lifting heavy, and my body was missing that. So I went back to a different CrossFit gym, but they have a specific strength / powerlifting program, and went back to that. And it felt so good. And I think the way you put it, it felt like coming home is exactly how it felt. And I think what I liked especially about it is that it was not competitive at all. It was really just about your own numbers. It's just, you and the barbell, and it feels good, and my body feels good. And I also, have a lot more respect for my own body, that I don't push myself to the point of injury or let my pride or ego get in the way. That, I've often stepped away from a lift being like, what, it doesn't feel right. I'm not going to do it, instead of just muscling through it. So, it's been a lot of relearning with that too.
Yeah. And then my last question before I open it up to anybody else who wants to ask questions is, I tend to struggle a lot, especially within this like hyper-masculine paradigm. Like, how do you balance ambition and like drive with surrender and letting go? So for example, like, this need to be like successful and super, like having it together, perfectionism with, okay, I'm just going to lay in bed all Sunday. And so what would you say, like, how do you balance that? And do you ever get stressed out about this idea of like letting go and surrendering to what your body's actually telling you?
I think the more I've listened to myself, to what I need physically, emotionally, spiritually, the more I just feel like my most authentic self. And I feel like things get chaotic in my life when I'm not being myself and I'm not honoring myself. And I usually find that, I don't know, I really do find that I am, and naturally, I think, again, as someone with perfectionist tendencies, I am very driven, and I'm very hardworking, and I'm a very determined person. But I also need to I've developed the introspection to question the kind of motives behind that. So am I doing this, to live up to some standard I've constructed in my head? Or am I doing it because it brings me joy? And I think that a lot of things in my life have shifted because I've reframed that in my mind, that like what fills my soul. And, you know, it's like right now my work fills my soul. And so I really do put 110% into it, but I feel energized by it and it doesn't drain me. I feel fulfilled by my relationships. I feel really good about the self-work that I've done and, you know, my relationship with food and movement. And those things fill my soul. And so it really is just like checking in with, you know, is this bringing something into my life or is it taking away from my life? And really trying to find that balance.
That's really awesome, B. You just always hit the nail right on the head. I love it. Great. Well, thank you so much for speaking your truth. And Danny, do you have any questions for V or any comments?
Thanks so much for sharing. I felt like when you were talking, I felt like I was talking to like a best friend, and I'm like, oh, me too. I felt all that same feelings. I counted macros for, I think it was like 3 or 4 years. Same thing. I was never competitive. I put myself through the ringer for like what purpose? And the macro counting came naturally for me as well, because I'm definitely perfectionist. I have like very like obsessive tendencies, so it played right into all those feelings for me. And coming out of it, I haven't been like overly vocal about this on with a whole lot of people, but it's something I do want to talk about. But I also started seeing a therapist in the fall of last year for an eating disorder. So just like really quick, I have a history of like obesity, and I ended up losing like half my body weight and found like health and fitness. And then it just sort of shifted to this other extreme. So, you know, through the macro counting, I just had to be the very smallest version of myself. And like you said, I hit, you know, this goal weight and like there was nothing there. I felt so depleted. I mean, I wasn't even having a period anymore. I just was nothing. And I think coming out of that and like seeking help with a therapist and getting help with the eating disorder, the hardest part for me is watching my body change again.
Yeah.
And being okay with seeing it expand and not going back to, oh, you're going to be 250 pounds again. You know what I mean? And it's just hard. Feeling it, and not just seeing it, but feeling it like in your clothes. And that was really hard. So how have you dealt with like physically feeling yourself change for better and the shit that makes you feel uncomfortable?
I will be perfectly honest, and it's a struggle. I, you know, when I talk with my therapist about it, I feel like, you know, some people who go through an eating disorder, it comes in hot and leaves pretty easily. It's kind of one and done. They've dealt with it. They'll never have to deal with it ever again. And, you know, I'm also someone who struggles with depression and anxiety. And I feel like, as with those things in my life, this is also probably going to be an ongoing thing that I always have to take care of. And I've kind of just accepted that, you know, even if I'm not engaging in those disordered behaviors anymore, the thoughts are probably still going to be there. So kind of, you know, the journey of self-acceptance has been a really challenging one. And I even struggle with the concept of self-love, because that even still feels unattainable to me. That's not even really accessible to me, but self-acceptance has been really powerful. That, you know, I started practicing a lot of mindfulness, and I found that to be like, a year ago, I would have thought that that's like super like woo woo. You know, I'm not about like sitting here with my crystals and meditating. That's just like not for me. And then like fast forward a year and a half, and I have to practice mindfulness if I want to keep myself sane. And part of mindfulness is non-judgment. And so a lot of what I've practiced with my body and with self-acceptance is learning to look at myself with non-judgment. So, when I look at myself in the mirror and, where even at my smallest, I would have still picked apart every single flaw. Yep. Now, when I look at myself, I'll say, that's a body. That's a body. It's just a body. Those are legs. Those are arms. That's a tummy. It's a body. And I feel like taking away the judgment and the good or bad value from it has been a really powerful shift. I also think that looking at the pros and cons of my eating disorder and what it served for me, there were a lot of pros for sure. It provided me with a really tight sense of control in my life when everything else felt chaotic. I felt like I had one thing I could hold on to. When the rest of the world was crumbling around me, at least I knew I could control my weight. Or at least control, the numbers of macros that I would hit. So it was definitely a tool for self-preservation. I think I got a lot of validation. I got a lot of positive reinforcement. Society looks at you a lot differently when you look a specific way. People treat you differently when you look a specific way. You get a different kind of attention when you look a specific way. So there are a lot of pros. Yeah. But then when I look at what it cost me, there's no question. The cons definitely outweighed it. I was miserable. And by the end of it, when people were commenting on how good I looked, I just wanted to scream and shake them. But if you only knew what was going on in my head and how miserable I was, you wouldn't say that. And I wanted to tell people, don't tell me that you think I look good, because it's just forcing me to do this even more and even harder. And so remembering just the moments where, I'd be sitting at the dinner table with friends and family and they'd all be engaged in conversation. And I was missing out on those moments because I was too focused on how am I going to track this? Yep. Or canceling plans with friends because I thought that I looked fat. Or not wanting to go back to my old CrossFit gym because I didn't look the same anymore. So when I think about what it took away from me, it completely outweighs it. It just is not worth it. And so when I look at how I look now, and I'm probably the thickest I've been in a really long time.
Thicker than a bowl of oatmeal.
I love oatmeal, so I'm here for it. Yeah. It's a work in progress. I don't fit into a lot of the clothes I had last year. Even some of my stretchy Lululemons I've had to go up a size, and that's tough. Old pictures of myself I put in a completely different folder on my phone because looking at it felt like torture.
I was about to ask you that exact question. Things will pop up or something on Facebook will say, oh, this time 2 years ago, and you're like,
yep.
At first I see skin, I see bones, I see the pain.
Yeah.
And then the second feeling I get is, wow, I kind of wish I looked like again. That comparison. You compare yourself to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I was doing that too. And so kind of the same way that I weeded that out of my Instagram, I did it on my album in my phone.
Yeah.
I still, and I'll admit this, I still haven't deleted them because I feel like, I don't know, a part of me still wants to hang on to that old me, but right. I put them in my hidden folder on my phone. So I don't look at them. It doesn't show up in my albums. So every photo where I thought that I looked, I was kind of at the height of my eating disorder, or where I knew that I would compare myself to my old self, I tucked all of those photos away because I don't need to see that shit. And so as much as, and I totally feel the same way that you do, that, I see how miserable I was and how empty I was and how much of my life that I was missing. But then at the same time, it's the diet culture message being like, but you look good. And so I'm like, Again, I think that it's something that I'm always going to have to deal with. And that's part of that is just like letting go of the old me, old clothes that don't fit anymore. I'm not going to torture myself trying to fit back into them. So, I've given them away to friends. I've consigned them. I've donated them. They're out of my life. My closet is pretty minimal right now. It's pretty pared down, and I'm okay with that. That's another thing too, is like, if people have the means to fill your wardrobe back up with clothes that make you feel really good, because that can be really empowering instead of like,
sorry, go ahead, V.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, instead of something where you're like, ooh, this is kind of like pinching my rolls a little bit, like I feel self-conscious in it, like go buy yourself something that you feel smoking in. It doesn't matter what size you are, what shape you have, like you can find something that you look banging in.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. So I think like that next piece of like learning those self-love practices is like making sure that you, like, I was just realizing like I haven't worked out all week and I have a little bit of a like, bloat and like a little bit of a pooch, but I'm like, I'm going to put on my hottest spandex and my little sports bra, and I'm going to go out, because I'm in Vancouver right now. I'm going to go out to the beach and like do acro yoga because I'm fucking hot. And so it's like coming back to that, like that sexual, I feel like sexual and sensuality, like all those energies really do feed that self-love. And it's like, no, I'm going to dance naked around my room and like let things jiggle because I'm a fucking sensual, hot being. And it's like, for me, at least that, like, I always come back to that, especially when I'm feeling like a little bit low about myself. It's exploring myself more, like giving myself more pleasure and filling that back up. And yeah, and like putting on some red lipstick and a hot dress and being like, yeah, I'm a hot bitch,
Totally. And I think like a lot of that, like fake it till you make it stuff is like so cheesy, but at the same time, like there's actually, I wish I could remember her name. There's a TED Talk. She talks about power poses. And really the psychological power of, before you're about to step into something important, like hands on your hips or whatever that power pose feels like for you. If you want to do the like Rosie the Riveter, the power pose, deep breath, chest out, chin up, and the like psychological effect that has on you of actually like taking up more space, and the power that has, and how we're told to just like shrink ourselves down to, tiny women who have no voice and have no power, instead really reclaiming that space and filling yourself back up with that confidence. I think that can be so good. Power pose.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think we should wrap up. And I think all of these things are helping us get on our way to becoming pussy powerhouses. And yeah, we're constantly changing, and life is too fucking short to like be completely consumed by these things. And I think you attest to that. Like when we let go of it, we become more expansive. We just step into our authentic selves. And I think reconnecting to that and to what we know and what our truth is super powerful. And I think that's how we're going to change the world. So we must do these things.
I can't remember if it was Lindy West or someone else on a podcast, but they were talking about, how reclaiming your size and living as your, at whatever body size that you are, is one of the most like powerful feminist things you can do, because, we are as women conditioned to, be told to be quieter, to be smaller, to be less. And being more is, it's an act of rebellion, in that, women can really come into themselves and can fucking take on the world when you live your truest, authentic self.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much. And Danny, thanks for being here and sharing yours.
Thank you all so much. It was wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
All right, ladies, have a wonderful rest of your day. And that's it for today, Psychedelic Gypsies. I love you all. And yeah, let's join up together next Sunday.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.